Very happy Sunday to everybody on this September 12th. We are talking about Reverend Dennis Reynolds' service, The Times They Are A-Changin', going back to some 60s rock roots, I think, for that title. If that's right, Dennis?
Folk rock,
Yeah, folk rock. Yeah. Anyway, it's very good to have you. Yeah. So it's always fruitful conversation when you're here. So, well, okay, if it's okay with everybody, I think I'd like to start this conversation. So Dennis, I think it's fair to say that for the talk today, especially regarding extreme weather events, and how that with seventh, especially with the seventh principle, that we have a responsibility to the environment in front of us. Could you give your idea of a prescription as to the how that would happen, right? Like if we acknowledge that there's a problem, then what are the steps that we ought to be taking?
Thanks, Michael. That's, I get to start with that's a good question to buy myself some time to ponder. Right. And I do think it's a series of steps. And I think part of it is influenced by a book I'm reading this week, which I recommend highly, and I may preach from it and encourage some additional study, called Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Kilmer Wells. And who she is she's a botanist and an indigenous woman who talks about the weaving together of different worldviews that she has studied as a scientist and has been immersed in her whole life as an indigenous person who grew up in a culture that had a different relationship to the earth than the scientific one she studied on the route to her PhD. And so the sense I'm feeling now that the first step is where does that sense of a call to action come from, what I call responsibilities. And I believe it comes from if we love and believe we are loved by all existence, to use the language of our UU seventh principle, then how can we not act? Mm-hmm. If we act from that fundamental core of love. So for me, the first piece comes as a call to do something. And that moves us beyond our indifference, which I know I need to do to take the steps to do the things that are not necessarily in my benefit. And so that's kind of the first step, is to reaffirm our love for all creation, to use that language that we were using before you started recording.
Right.
And that includes our impact when we sort of overbalanced carbon in the atmosphere versus what plant life can take out in return as oxygen. Because that's the real problem we're facing. There's always been this incredible process of what people call the breathing earth. The Amazon rainforest has historically been called the lungs of the earth because it takes carbon dioxide out and returns it as oxygen. Well, there's less Amazon and there's more, carbon dioxide and methane. And so if we acknowledge that reality, which science reaffirms again and again, then we look at taking the steps we can. And some of those are our personal steps in terms of lifestyle. I, in part because I can afford it, have a plug-in hybrid car. And so my first 18 to 19 miles every trip are electric. And I live in a place where 92% of the electricity in Eugene comes from hydropower. So it's pretty darn green. I live in a smaller house than I could afford to live in. I have efficient heat pumps, electric, that heat and cool my house. Those steps, because when I made the choices to build a new home, I made choices that were very green. And then in the simpler level, we wash a lot of plastic bags at my house.
Yep.
and use them over and over again. But then I'm not perfect. I'm going to travel to England this fall to meet my new grandson, and I will buy carbon offsets to try to ease my guilt and to make a difference. But then I think it's also policy pieces. I'm in part of now the Eugene Sustainability Commission, which is a group that advises Eugene City Council on how Eugene can be more sustainable, and does research around that, not only in terms of what the city itself does, but what might be city policy, or even things like zoning requirements that require greener houses. Those are local policy decisions that can make a difference. My county, Lane County, is looking at a variety of initiatives to reduce the amount of carbon, fossil fuels burnt in this county. The state legislature, as I mentioned briefly, took some legislative action and executive action when it couldn't happen legislatively to require state agencies to look at regulations that make a difference in climate. And there's some huge investments, pending at a federal level. So I think the first piece is, kind of reiterate the list, is personal responsibility, and then see what we can do in our own local communities, and then looking at beyond in terms of policies. And then upcoming here real soon is, some continuing international conversations in Copenhagen. And so I think all of those levels are important. So that's kind of a summary, answer about, steps, changes in lifestyle, sometimes because we choose to, and sometimes because we need to.
Right. And, I would have a hard time believing that there's very much that you said that anybody could really disagree with. To me, those seem like practical, first step ways to just kind of make sure that the world and our environment is less dirty, which I would imagine is something that everybody's interested. I imagine that everybody in here probably has at least one or two friends, maybe more, who are on the side that climate change is a hoax in order to increase our taxes, or for the government to take control over our population. That is an idea that's floating around out there. And I don't personally believe that, but some people do. But even for that section of the population who believe that, would look at like the garbage in our oceans or on our beaches, and shudder, because that is an immediate, representation of just how wasteful our society's been. And I think we can all get on board with being less wasteful.
Right. And I think, Michael, part of the stuff, and I just mentioned it briefly in the sermon, that there's a shift happening in terms of, fewer folks who use that language of hoax.
Mm-hmm.
Daniel Imhoff, a US Senator, I think he's from South Carolina, I'm not sure. He wrote a book in the 90s where he referenced the climate hoax in the title. Mm-hmm. And he has now said, we need to recognize the reality of human impact on the changing climate. The alternative is, he says, but we can't reduce fossil fuels because that will damage the economy.
Right.
But he's no longer calling it a hoax. And he at one point claimed, and they quoted him in the New York Times saying, I never said it was a hoax. Well, it's in the title of the book you published was the word hoax. So he's kind of changing his tune. And denying he ever said what he said before. But I guess that's being politic,
Yeah,
so.
which we probably can't escape,
So I think there's a shift, and I think it's here locally, particularly those of us who have lived in Oregon for long periods of time, know it's not the same here as it used to be.
Fair enough. Yeah.
It's hotter in the summer, it's drier, the fires are worse, we get more heavy rainstorm, and there's less snowpack. We all experience that directly. So whether or not we're looking closely at the climate change data that the scientists are reviewing, our own eyes and our noses and our mouths and our lungs tell us that things are changing.
Yeah. Yeah.
The
I,
time they are a changing.
they are a changing. Yeah. I have more to talk about if there's time, but Edith wanted to get in, so I'm going to yield to Edith.
Well, I was just wondering if there's anything we could do to persuade Douglas County to reinstate that we can separate our trash. I'm really disturbed when I have a jar, a pickle jar. I feel horribly guilty throwing that right in with, and I was just in Europe and they recycle everything.
Everything. We recycle
Everything.
everything where I came from too. Yeah.
You know, and we used to be able to, and now we can only recycle plastic bottles. That's about it, I guess.
Yeah. Aluminum can.
Right.
Yeah.
Aluminum, well,
and
yeah.
That's one of the things that's available to us in more ways in cities and counties here in Oregon and at the state level as well. Our representatives represent a smaller group of people. And so sometimes they have to listen more to us as individuals because they're not elected by a million people. They're elected by smaller numbers. And I know, you know, it's changing in Lane County. Lane County has just started a climate action advisory group in the last year. So it's, you know, it's putting those preferences out to your county administrators. Is kind of one of the steps that we can all take.
Yeah. And I hear you, Edith. You know, I when the recycling went away at the dump, I can't tell you how many people I saw just dumping aluminum cans into the trash because, you know, they were used to taking it to the recycling bins. You know,
We take all of our stuff to Bottle Drop.
Yeah, yeah. I think
And-
we're doing that now.
But what, maybe I'm wrong, but may I just interrupt here? I don't mean to take over, but what I understood is it was too expensive or to invest in the types of recycling, whatever it is that is needed to do what we were used to. And to me, that is being penny wise and pound foolish.
Right.
And that seems to be decisions made at the county level often that I've noticed from being a new resident here for 11 years. So where we came from, we had 3 trash bins, one that was total for green waste, one that was for garbage, and one that was for anything that could be recycled. And I was shocked when I got here. Of course, the first few years that we were here, Joe dutifully took everything to the dump where he could put the wine bottles here and the this, and then when that went away, we said the nuts with that, you know, so at least our gardener takes all of our green waste away and takes it and dumps it in wherever he takes all of his stuff at the dump. So we do have that, but.
Well, and that reminds me of when I used to have a bumper sticker on my old pickup truck that read "Compost happens."
It does.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing, being an old person, I just remember where we used to take things to get fixed, from vacuum cleaners to appliances, and everything nowadays seems to be made to be thrown away.
Yes.
And if you do have something that needs being fixed, there's no place to take it. I mean, I'm very disturbed about the throwaway society that we have. And I'm a plastic bag washer. I have a bag of wash bags in my kitchen, and then I hang them up after I wash them. I mean, you know, think of all the
We bought a
plastic bags.
groovy little rack just for the plastic bags. Right?
Yeah. I have a laundry room that has racks that I can hang things on. So yeah. So yeah, we try really hard to not dump stuff. Joe dutifully wraps all the cardboard up, and they do pick that up. And he takes newsprint back to the News Review. You know, so there you go.
Cool. Larry. Oh dear, Larry, it sounds like you're muted. Let's see, or your sound's not up. Sorry, you using the right microphone, Larry?
Here,
Larry.
I think Cheryl's coming to the rescue.
There you go. Cheryl's coming to
I have no idea.
Oh, wait, it sounds like we got something.
Wow.
Did you get me?
Yep,
Yeah.
Keep talking.
Hello?
yep, you're good,
I
Larry.
walked in with her computer from the other room. That's why we're getting an echo.
Yeah.
Okay, you hear me now?
Yeah.
We're getting a view of your house.
Oh,
place.
don't look.
The towel, open that computer quick, Cheryl. So I'm thinking back in the day when containers were filled, not purchased and then thrown away.
Right.
And I know that's probably never gonna.
Oh dear, we lost
I
you
think
again.
there's
I
something
hear
wrong
you,
with
Larry. You can come in there, in here,
Yeah.
Can't you hear me?
just
No,
barely.
Well, I don't know what's wrong, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, that's
Now's not the
okay.
time to investigate.
Fair enough. And it happens, technology. But yeah, containers being filled rather than purchased is incredibly wise.
yeah, it used to happen all the time. I can remember when I was little, the milkman bringing glass bottles to be used, and then they're set outside for him to pick up, and then in his next run. And I never saw a problem with that. And the same thing goes for the glass pop bottles, even though I don't really use pop or drink pop. We still do have a recycling thing, but that's what they used to do before, was refill them, unless there was a chip on the end of it or something. And wax paper straws instead of the plastic ones. Those worked fine. They would collapse if you used it to death, but get another one. Burn.
And of course, Dennis's talk covered more than just the environmental portion, but if anybody had any ideas. Well, okay. Yeah,
Michael, I'll float out a piece about, we've talked mostly about, recycling and reuse, but three little phrases that I always like. And I used to have a sweatshirt on it with a little, circular: reduce, reuse, recycle. And I think that's the big picture, is that first one is reduce. And that's reduce how much we consume, most especially fossil fuels.
Yeah.
Can we drive less? Can we, move towards more efficient vehicles? I'm in part of an effort in Eugene to what's called fossil-free Eugene, is no more gas hookups for houses. Let's not burn more natural gas, which is a weird word anyway. It's not natural. Natural gas is not natural. They pop it out of, they drill for it. And it's still another fossil fuel, cleaner than coal,
Right.
but it's still another fossil fuel. So let's not do more pipelines to do even more. And the federal initiatives are calling for more incentives and charging stations for electric vehicles. And particularly in the state of Oregon now, they're tightening up regulations on emissions from trucks. And looking at more incentives for an electric trucking fleet. And any of us who drive on the highway know when we're passed by a big semi, they're spewing a lot more into the air than we are on our cars. And so trucking fleet changes are an important piece that's beginning to happen. So reduce, I think, is a big part of it. And that's the hard part, because sometimes it means I don't get to do everything I want to do or get all the stuff I want to get. And that takes, for me, caring more about the impacts I have on this planet that I love.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned in a line, and it's much more in a line in the sermon, is as a grandparent, it's not about me. It's about our children and our children's children.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Perfectly.
You're good.
Okay. I just
You whatever-
downloaded a new version of this thing, and so it was set to 0 for the volume.
Yeah. Well, you're coming in loud and clear. Did you want to finish your thought, Larry?
No, that was it. I just think, milk used to come in bottles. I know that's expensive, but they didn't have to, I'm not really for throwing all this stuff. Oh, I have a friend. He says he gathers all of his plastic up and he takes it down to the ocean and throws it into the ocean to save the landfill. He's being a card, okay, but
Oh,
what do we do?
Okay,
Where do we
good.
put it?
You did that so dry. I was
I
Roll.
thought, really? Did you try to change his mind?
yeah. Glennis wanted to go next.
Well, it does come down to personal responsibility on everybody's level. I can remember as a child, don't give a hoot, don't pollute, or even further back than that, don't be a litter bug. And a lot of the reason why there is so much trash in the ocean right now is because people are just not, it's just too hard to take something to the garbage can. I don't understand that. I just don't. Maybe there should be more garbage cans out or something.
Oh, that's
But
true. Yeah.
It's just, that's not taking care of our environment. That's trashing it even further. And I'm sorry if I'm being judgmental, but I'm saying get your garbage to the can. It's not that hard, really. And honestly, that's a lot of the trash that's in the ocean. People just toss it overboard if they're out in the boat or whatever,
Oh,
Yeah.
those cruise ships daily throw tons and all their trash goes right into the ocean once they're offshore. I'd really like to see that stopped.
Yes.
Dennis, did you want to chime in with
No,
anything?
I would, urge us too to take a broader definition of what's garbage. It's the recognition that there is garbage coming out of the exhaust pipes of our automobiles and trucks. And we don't hardly see it, so we don't think about it so much. But that's what's really creating the difficulties in terms of a warming planet. Is that, there is a greenhouse effect. I have a t-shirt that I bought, that reads science, because figuring stuff out is better than making stuff up. And we've got some pretty good science that says what comes out of our exhaust pipes and in other parts of the country, electric generating facilities are really what's changing the nature of not only our weather this summer, but year after year after year. And to look at, that's part of the trash that we spew, is the trash that comes out of our exhaust pipes. And that's the harder one to see and the harder one to begin to take steps to reduce.
Martha.
Well, I was just responding. I was shocked when I moved here, the amount of crap, pardon my French, junk that comes out of cars and the noise. You can complain about Californians, but we do have, in California, we had a lot more people and our air was much better. And cars were regulated and you had to have your car smogged every year in order to get your license renewed. And as an example, people that lived down the hill from us came from California. When they moved in, their truck was very quiet. And within months, that truck was no longer quiet. They fixed all kinds of fancy exhaust. And it was diesel. And and I was on Harvard going westbound, excuse me. And there was a truck in front of me with this major pipe, and I don't have all the technical terms for these words, but this was literally black coming out of that vehicle. And it was not an old truck. It was almost done on purpose.
Yes.
And there's no regulations, and people bitch and moan about how government encroaches on rights. Well, it's encroaching on my ability to breathe. And luckily I closed my car up quite quickly, and so I didn't smell it very, but this is nuts. There's little things like that. If every individual locality would take care of things, but I know that we live in a county that is more of a, my rights are more important than the community rights. So, and that is an issue that we have here.
Mhm.
So we'll just keep on trucking, literally. Couldn't resist that one.
Well, that is a fundamental issue that I would like to discuss if Dennis and the crew are okay with that. Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's do that. And so I think it was in Eugene where a couple of students brought a court case saying that air, breathable air was like a public good. It was a public right. Therefore, anybody who is affecting the breathability of the air is affecting, and I'm trying to paraphrase this, and Dennis, you probably know more about this than I do, but the students basically saying that the air is a public good, therefore, people should not be allowed to dirty the air. And I don't know what the result of that court case was.
Yeah, it's Juliana and others, and Juliana was a young woman from Eugene, but they had a number of plaintiffs from across the country. And actually, the UU Ministry for the Earth was touring with a young man from Florida who spoke at our church, a very articulate 11-year-old who was part of that lawsuit. And it made it through a level of 2 of the federal court system. The district court here in Eugene advanced it to a higher level. And then as I understand it, right now it's stalled.
Okay.
I don't understand the legal implications of it, but as I understand it, the case was, yeah, their right to a healthy future was being destroyed by a lack of governmental action to really try to take steps that would preserve the possibility of their future. And it got some traction for a while. And I think, as I understand, I know the legal details are more, refined than this, but that phrase that Martha used about when one's rights are encroaching on the rights of another was the issue. And I remember back when I was in school, and maybe even been in elementary school, when we talked about freedom, the description that I remember, and it was just sort of imprinted in my brain, was you have the freedom to swing your arm all you want, as long as it doesn't hit me in the face.
Right.
And your freedom to swing your arm ends when you hit me in the face.
Right.
Yes.
Well, your freedom to throw your garbage out the window infringes on my well-being.
Right.
What spews out of your tailpipe has an impact on me. And that's where I see the issue, where regulation for the public good becomes necessary over the right of an individual to drive whatever vehicle they choose to, or burn my trash in the backyard if that's what I choose to do.
Okay, so good. Because now I think we're in really, really fruitful territory. So because I think everybody in here would agree that like breathing in polluted air is harmful to us, right? So if somebody is polluting the air, there is a potential for them to be doing damage to us. In which case we might take on a mindset of self-defense, right? So for instance, let's say there was one country in the world that was polluting the earth to the extent that the sky was just black with pollution, right? And they refused to change their ways. They wouldn't listen to anybody, no matter how many sanctions, no matter what. They refuse to change their ways to where they're actually threatening life on the earth, in pretend land. Would we be justified in taking military action against such a country?
Well, I think to start with, Michael, we need to acknowledge we're not in pretend land.
Okay.
I mean, in terms of total emissions, China is the highest.
Very okay.
And they are spewing more carbon into the air than any other country. Per capita, it's us, right?
Right.
So it's like, depends on how you count it. If you count it per person or if you count it for a country that has a lot more people.
Right.
It's not just pretend land. And, we are trying to take diplomatic steps. Why there will be a gathering coming in. I'm trying to remember where the next one is. It isn't Copenhagen this time. At any rate, there's another post-Paris international gathering coming soon.
Norway?
I'm just blanking on where it is this time.
Is it Norway?
I'm not sure.
Oh, okay.
I think it is.
Top 20.
But still, I mean, the thing that gets me about these discussions is the governmental autonomy, right? That India and China are not subject to American rules. Like you said, we can take diplomatic action.
Mhm.
But I heard an estimate that as high as 30% of the air pollution on the west coast of the United States comes directly from China, right? So if we cut our emissions to zero tomorrow, we would still have China and India to deal with.
Right. And I think beyond diplomatic things, that's part of that reduce. If we bought fewer, Chinese produced electronics and tennis shoes, that would reduce that pollution potentially. I mean, that's some of the thing that's being talked about in terms of, really recording our impact. Is not just what we spew. For example, Lane County is trying to look at how does it assess the carbon impact of the things that are brought into the county, and we can do that at a national level in the same kind of way. Because it's a global issue, we need to look at those kinds of things, and they're beginning to discuss tariffs on products that are created with a high carbon footprint cost you more. I think there are some steps we can take in that international kind of basis. But, just because my neighbor may drive a car that spews more carbon isn't a reason for me to not reduce mine. I think it's a both and. I do what I can closer to home, and I encourage regulations and standards or additional costs at whatever level, to try to change my neighbor, whether it's my global neighbor or my literal next door neighbor behaviors.
But of course, all laws come at the point of a gun, right? For lack of a better word.
Well, at a point of a consequence.
Which would be eventually a gun.
Mhm.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, very few white people have traffic laws enforced at the point of a gun.
Well, okay, well, let's say that we create a a tax, right, for carbon emissions, right? And you refuse to pay the tax, and you refuse to go to jail for the tax, right? Then and that's what I mean by all laws exist at the point of a gun. That the enforcement of that, if you don't adhere to the enforcement of that law, then you will be facing law enforcement. Right.
But I think there are also other enforcers other than incarceration. I mean, as I said, I'm reading, Braiding Sweetgrass, which talks about indigenous communities, and the greatest punishment that can be inflicted on someone who's broken the rules in that culture is social ostracization, that
Right.
you are isolated from the community. And so I think there are other consequences other than, imprisonment or, those things that have to be enforced on the gun. And there's an element of truth to what you lift. But I would come back to that Hosea Ballou, considered the father of American universalism, who was camping with a traveling Baptist preacher. And he said, "You mean without a fear of hellfire and damnation? Why couldn't I just hit you over the head and steal your horse and all your belongings?" And Baloo's comments, "Well, if you were a universalist and really believed in a God of love, such an idea would never enter your mind." So there are some social kinds of enforcements and encouragements beyond consequence. I mean, any behavior, and this comes from the early childhood guy who was a preschool teacher and childcare director, who said, you encourage behavior, and then only when that encouragement doesn't work do you look at consequences.
Right. And all of those things are true, Dennis. I don't want to seem like I'm disagreeing with you, but those are social pressures. Those are not laws. Right. Edith. Okay, so we've got a couple of people wanting to get in. Edith, Joanne, then Larry.
To go back to this issue that seems to be at the forefront of this country, freedom, my freedom, my freedom not to wear a mask at the grocery store, my freedom not to get inoculated, my freedom. It reminds me, though, that years ago, and I think we can all recall, there was a huge debate about cigarette smoking on planes. And I remember in the 50s and 60s being on planes. Just, behind me was the smoking section. And for 11 hours, I'm breathing, from Europe to the West Coast, I'm breathing in someone's smoke. And it was a huge discussion. No, you're not going to tell me I can't smoke. And it goes back to this: if your actions or your inactions affect my health and my well-being, that's where your freedom ends. We had the same discussion about seatbelts. Oh my gosh, the government not going to tell me. Why is it we can't run red lights? Because we're going to endanger not only ourselves, we're going to endanger. Is that not something to do with my freedom? That I have to stop by law at a red light. Why? Because I might endanger someone else besides myself. And I don't really understand that people don't get it. It's the same with the mask wearing, with getting a shot. Your freedom ends when you're impinging upon my health and my well-being. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay. And and Dennis, I'll just let you chime in, whenever.
Right. Well, and I think that's partially related to the change you described about cigarettes. I've often used as examples of the possibility of real cultural change. I have three items that I lift up: seatbelts, cigarettes, and same-sex marriage. Do I believe profound cultural change is possible? Yes. Why do I believe it? Because those three things are right there as examples of how a culture can change. I mean, I grew up in an America where we used to get on that little, they call it the luggage shelf behind the back seat of a sedan. And I would sleep up there as a little kid. My sister had a car seat that hung over the front of the seat. On the front seat that they euphemistically used to call baby launchers, because in an accident, babies would fly through the windshield, and, I would ride in the back of a pickup truck, when I was a little kid, and, and there were kids that
still doing that.
on the back of the pickup truck, and so we've set legal standards and cultural standards around seatbelts and car seats for little kids and stuff. And cigarettes used to be smoked in offices, in airplanes, and it was just wherever, and it was viewed as an issue of freedom. And when they were first banned, there was a lot of pushback around freedom, and there's not much anymore. People have come to accept that this is just the reality of our culture, that smoke in other people's faces isn't acceptable anymore. Same-sex marriage was considered, an anathema to some, but that was a case where somebody's freedom didn't impinge on anybody else's freedom. And why couldn't a same-sex couple be, free to wed whom they love? And, you know, that was a huge, profound cultural change and attitudinal change. And I think we need to be looking at huge attitudinal changes about our relationship to the planet. And
Well,
that's why I brought up that notion of fundamentally reminding ourselves of the incredible ability of this dewdrop planet. And from that.
and I think one thing in that, you know, just in your list, Dennis, that's vital for us to remember is that the legality of same-sex marriage was decided essentially by the Supreme Court.
Right.
The least democratic institution of our three, you know, sections of government.
Well, in the state I was living in at the time, it was decided on the ballot.
Fair enough. But if you, even in California, you know, which is considered to be among the most liberal, they outlawed, or not outlawed, but, you know, through the ballot box decided that marriage was definitively between a man and a woman. It took the Supreme Court to undo that. So in our conversations about democracy, I think that we ought to keep things like that in mind.
Well, and I think it was part of a social change, though, that the court was even willing to consider.
That's true. I agree with
and
that.
then it became interpreted as a violation of fundamental rights. And that was the nature of the court ruling. But if there hadn't been a profound cultural change, it never would have made it onto the docket.
Also true.
And that's what I want to lift up primarily, is cultural change is possible. And cultural change that changes our attitudes about responsibility for the planet and the thin layer of atmosphere that surrounds it is something that I, you know, as a person of faith, believe we can change the way we have been about that.
Yeah. So Larry, I apologize, everybody. I'm dominating. Larry and then Connie.
You've skipped Joanne.
Oh, I skipped Joanne. I'm so sorry. Thank you very much, Cheryl. Joanne, please go ahead.
Oh, me? Okay.
Yes, please.
4 years ago, I was in India and China, and I saw the very best of the country. But when I was in Tiananmen Square, I saw a little old lady, not much older than you and I, digging through a garbage can because she doesn't have enough food. Many of the people there are considered disposable, as you and I would be considered disposable. So for me, the only thing I see is if we as Americans place a tariff on our electronics and our shoes and everything else coming from those countries, because nothing is going to change the higher echelon of their power unless it hits them where it hurts. And financially we'll do that. So the concern is, as you and I are human beings here in America, are we willing to pay more for our goods?
Okay.
Mhm.
Good point.
That really hit in a sore spot. We have to pay more to be good. I just wanted to bring up, and this is kind of like, what, 15 minutes ago, and so you gotta say, what was we talking about? But I grew up in LA, Long Beach, actually. And I remember the air being horrible. We could see the mountains maybe twice a year. We had days that we were told not to exercise. It was smog alert days, and your lungs hurt if you breathe. This is back in the 60s and 70s, 60s.
I was there. Yep.
It's not like that anymore. The times I've been there, the air has been nice. And I know the cars have really helped, but I think it's also, they passed laws about emissions from factories, and those factories that wouldn't upgrade their equipment aren't there anymore. They've gotten rid of them. The law has taken them out of action. They're not there. They're here. No, I don't know where they are. They're in China, but they're not in LA. Anyways, done.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Larry, those days you described now exist here. I mean, I have asthma, and I watched last week the pollution index as to whether or not I could go outside that day.
Mhm.
And so we got those kind of days here now every year during forest fire season. So.
It looks similar
Yeah.
to what it was when we were growing up.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's making me homesick.
Okay, great. Connie.
Well, first of all, I want to say if you grew up in Eugene, every fall there was field burning.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We had, we had to deal with that. And so there's regulations now, more regulations about field burning. But I can remember a period of time where we were young, and we thought, oh, who cares if it's smoky or not? But anyway, what I wanted to say something about two things. One, about remember when we had these really good public service announcements? So it got me to thinking about how many times a day is the same news repeated, so that by the time it's evening, you just want to go, shut up already. I've heard that 20 times today. Well, I can remember when there were lots of public service announcements, and where those little announcements would be like a little song that you can't forget, in your mind. But I think that's a direction that we could go with educational public service announcements about our garbage, the air, whatnot. So I think that could be approached by maybe calling the television station or the radio station and encouraging them to come out with more public service announcements. So I think that would be a positive thing that any one of us could do. Another thing that I wanted to ask local people is if you're involved or go to any of the global warming coalition here in Douglas County.
Mhm.
So we do have an active group, and it's pretty small. And two of those kids that were advocating for clean air were from Douglas County.
Mhm. Yep.
Okay.
So that's a program or a cause that we could all be involved in. That's it for me.
And I just want to follow that. When we take action, it comes from a sense of hope, and taking action increases our sense of hope. I want to remind you of the latter part of the sermon where I talked both about Emily Dickinson's description of hope as, as the thing with feathers that sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. That part of the quote from Emily Dickinson, that it never stops at all, sometimes gets cut off. It's just we talk about the thing with feathers that perches in the soul. And the Maya Angelou piece that I shared about, we can feel overwhelmed when we do nothing. But then when we work to make something different, it increases our own sense of hope. And so I think there's a positive cycle that happens when we take action. We feel like we're doing something that make a difference. We believe we can make a difference, and so we do more. And so, that hanging on to that sense of hope is, I think, part of why we come together in what we call a faith community, because we have hope and we have faith. And we know, I close with that John Lennon piece, I'm not the only one. Well, when I gather in Unitarian Universalist circles, I get reaffirmations that I'm not the only one, and it becomes join us collectively. And we broaden a circle of believers in our capacity to make a difference.
So Kim, you're the only person who hasn't spoken yet. I imagine you probably have something to say.
Yeah,
you don't have to, but
the question about how to not buy things from China, I'm thinking, well, it's kind of hard not to buy anything from China because it's pretty much all every tag I see it's made by China or somewhere else in a different country. But so I think we need to start making more stuff here in the United States, because that will help people get jobs, and that will help, boost our economy better. And then we won't have to be relying on other countries for stuff that we need. But it's going to cost more because we Americans will not work for slave labor like they do around the world. So we have to just buck up and, okay, we'll have to pay more money for stuff if we don't want to involve other countries. I watched a Shark Tank show one time where a guy in the United States was making some type of car part. I don't remember exactly what it was, some type of car part. And and it was in Illinois. He was wanting to manufacture it in Illinois, in his hometown, where they don't have any manufacturing jobs anymore. And the Shark Tank people refused to do it. They wanted to make him go overseas somewhere so that they can build it really cheap and sell it really cheap. And he didn't do it because he wanted to do it in his hometown so that all the neighborhoods would get their jobs, because no one had jobs there. And he wanted to help his America with jobs. And I just thought that was, wow, you can't even help America get their own jobs. So I think that's what we need to consider more of, that kind of things to help. It will not only will help Americans have jobs, it will less increase the dependent on other countries. Like when COVID first hit, my dad was worried that he wouldn't get some medicine that comes from China, because maybe China would stop sending it over or whatever. And it really got to thinking, well, maybe we need to start making more of our own stuff so that we're not dependent on anybody. That's just what I feel about that.
Yeah.
Right, and you're right too. You lifted up the sense that, because labor costs in other places are, slave labor, was the phrase you used, things are cheaper. I mean, that's the Nike model.
Yeah.
Was they designed running shoes in Eugene and made them in Korea and elsewhere in Asia and Indonesia, so that we could have groovy sneakers.
Yeah.
And made billions. Which is why Phil Knight can, give so much money to the University of Oregon, et cetera. But yeah, it's going to be an extra surcharge, if you will, if we buy things that, aren't produced in sweatshops or in factories that spew too much smoke. Those are the kinds of differences in what we buy and how we buy. Is some of the most profound impacts each of us as individuals can make is the impacts we make as consumers, what we buy and how much we buy.
Yeah, but my thing is, you want to do that, but you can't, because everything's made in China, And you're like, well, what's made in America? Well, nothing's really made in America.
Well, I
right now.
haven't looked lately, but used to be Brooks running shoes were made in the US.
That's the
Nike,
kind I
the Nikes are made elsewhere. So it requires some self-education. Also, we can look at buying from more sustainable businesses here in this country as well. There are what's called E-Corps or B Corps, benefit corporations, and there's just hasn't gotten, other than really small labels of B Corporation products, like Patagonia and Ben & Jerry's ice cream and seventh generation paper products and cleaning products are certified genuinely green industries. So what we buy and how we buy it has global impacts in job markets and environmentally.
Mm-hmm. Well, Boy, Dennis, that environmental portion took the entire hour. You know, there were other things that you're
I tried to weave us back to
Yeah.
hope.
Yeah. Oh, no. Yeah, you did a great job. You know, another thing that I guess we just need to have you back and continue this later, you know, was the idea of generational change in the US, but that will have to wait because we are out of time. And so thank you everyone for being here. Dennis, you get the last word.
I don't have anything more to say other than, you know, I invite people, and this comes from what I do every day. You know, most days, I have a meditation practice, and part of that is just sitting with it. And I'm reminded by, I sign up from Tricycle Magazine to a daily Dharma. And one of the ones in the last couple of days was to let whatever emerges from the mind emerge. And when I sit with it in quiet, things emerge. Process a little more slowly, as I described it in conversation with a Buddhist teacher I worked with. At least then my monkey mind becomes more coherent. So I invite you all to take what's moving in you, the hard stuff and the good stuff, and sit with it and give it some time to circle in the deeper parts of your mind and your heart.
Yeah. I think we could all use some of that. All right. Well, Reverend Dennis Reynolds, thank you again, and to everybody who contributed, which was everybody. You guys are awesome, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
all.
Bye-bye.